There is a point in the ocean where the color red no longer exists. It is absorbed first, gone within the first few hundred meters, then orange disappears, then yellow, then green, until eventually there is nothing left but black. Below 1,000 meters, sunlight does not reach, not even a trace. No fading, no glow, just darkness that has been there since the water itself formed. More than 90% of the ocean exists below the point where sunlight can survive. And in that darkness, the pressure is hundreds of times greater than what you feel standing on land right now. The temperature barely sits above freezing. Food doesn't grow here. It drifts down from the world above in tiny, slow-falling pieces. Sometimes it doesn't arrive at all, and yet something lives down here. Not just one thing, entire communities. Animals with no eyes, animals that glow, animals with transparent bodies, drifting through water that has never once been touched by daylight. And deep on the ocean floor, in cracks where the Earth's own heat escapes through the rock, something even stranger is happening. Life thriving without a single photon of sunlight. Powered by the planet itself, we have better maps of Mars than we do of this place, and it is right beneath us. If this kind of slow descent is something you want more of, you can support the channel with a like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Now we continue downward into the depth where sunlight no longer exists. There is a point in the ocean where the familiar does not disappear all at once, but is slowly set aside, layer by layer, as though the surface world is being folded away behind us. The water above still belongs to weather and sunlight, but below, the structure of that world begins to thin, then soften, then quietly give way to something more distant. At the uppermost reach, the ocean feels alive in ways that mirror land. Sunlight pours downward in shifting bands, warming the surface and feeding vast communities of microscopic plants that drift with the currents. Color moves freely here, carried by scales, shells, and living skin. Motion is constant, shaped by waves, winds, and tides that never quite come to rest. It is a place of abundance, where energy arrives daily from the sky and spreads outward through countless forms of life. As depth increases, this brightness begins to fade, not abruptly, but with a steady, almost patient dimming. The first change is subtle, a soft weakening of light, followed by a cooling that settles into the water with quiet persistence. The colors that once moved so freely begin to lose their clarity, as if they are being gently erased. Food, once widely available, becomes less predictable, drifting in uneven patterns rather than constant supply. Pressure builds silently, pressing inward from every direction, unnoticed at first, then gradually becoming a defining force. This descent can be understood as a sequence of broad layers, each one marking a step further from the surface. The sunlit zone holds the familiar ocean, shaped by light and warmth. Beneath it lies the twilight zone, where illumination fades into a dim blue haze, and shapes become harder to distinguish. Beyond that, the midnight zone begins, where sunlight no longer reaches at all, and the ocean enters a state of permanent darkness. Far below, the abyssal seafloor stretches across immense distances, a landscape of sediment and stillness. Deeper still, the trenches cut into the planet's crust, descending into the most extreme environments the ocean can offer. Each layer removes something that once felt essential. Light gives way first, followed by warmth, then by the steady presence of food. Movement slows, becomes measured, and begins to conserve rather than spend. The ocean does not lose life as it deepens, but it reshapes it, guiding it into forms that no longer depend on the surface for direction. The seafloor itself is not a single, uniform expanse. It is varied and complex, shaped by forces that have worked over immense spans of time. There are wide plains where fine particles settle into soft, even layers. There are rising mountains that break the current and gather life along their slopes. There are deep canyons that channel movement through narrow passages, and vents where the earth releases heat and minerals into the surrounding water. Trenches open downward into long, narrow depths that seem to separate themselves from everything above. With each stage of the descent, the connection to the surface becomes less immediate, less influential, until it begins to feel distant altogether. The ocean that remains is not defined by waves or weather, but by pressure, darkness, and the slow movement of energy through a vast, quiet system. From here onward, the sense of the familiar world continues to recede, not through sudden change, but through steady subtraction. What remains is a more fundamental version of life, one shaped by endurance, efficiency, and the careful use of what little is available. At a certain depth, the last trace of day does not fade in a dramatic sweep, but settles into absence with a quiet finality, as though the ocean has closed a door that will not open again. The descent passes through dimness, through a narrowing band of color and shape, until there is no longer any light to measure, only a uniform darkness that remains unchanged from moment to moment. Below this boundary, time is no longer marked by the rise or fall of the sun. There is no morning that arrives, no evening that softens the horizon. The steady cycle that shapes life near the surface has no presence here. The water does not brighten or dim, and nothing in the environment signals the passing of a day. It is a place where illumination from above has ceased entirely, leaving behind a constant, unbroken night. This absence reshapes life in ways that reach far beyond vision alone. Creatures that descend into this depth cannot rely on sight as a primary guide, because there is no natural light to receive or reflect. Eyes, where they remain, no longer serve the same purpose. Instead, other senses begin to take precedence, attuned to faint movements, subtle chemical traces, and the smallest disturbances in the surrounding water. Perception becomes less about seeing and more about sensing, as if the environment is understood through contact rather than observation. The ocean itself begins to feel different here, not simply darker, but fundamentally changed in character. Without light, the sense of distance shifts. There is no horizon to orient against, no gradual fading of color to suggest depth or direction. Space becomes difficult to measure, and the environment loses many of the visual cues that define place. The water no longer resembles the ocean known at the surface. It becomes something more enclosed, more indefinite, a vast interior rather than an open expanse. In this region, the idea of the ocean as an extension of the familiar world quietly dissolves. What remains is a separate realm, shaped by conditions that no longer follow the patterns established above. The absence of sunlight is not simply a missing feature, but a dividing line, a point beyond which the rules of life begin to diverge. The connection to the surface persists only in distant, indirect ways, carried downward through slow processes rather than immediate influence. Living forms that inhabit this depth reflect that separation. Their structures and behaviors are no longer guided by the presence of day, but by the demands of a world that offers no natural illumination. Movement, feeding, and interaction occur without reference to light, shaped instead by signals that travel through darkness in other forms. The environment becomes one where visibility is replaced by awareness, and where survival depends on detecting what cannot be seen. This threshold carries a subtle shift in perception, one that extends beyond biology into something more abstract. The ocean, once continuous with the world above, now feels distant from it, as if it occupies a separate layer of reality within the same planet. The darkness is not empty, but complete, filling every direction with a uniform presence that does not change or yield. From this depth onward, the descent no longer feels like a gradual transition within a single environment, but like an entry into a domain that exists alongside the familiar world, yet follows its own quiet order. In the absence of sunlight, a different kind of brightness begins to appear, not from above, but from within the bodies of the animals themselves. Small points of radiance emerging in a world that offers none of its own. These lights do not arrive all at once. They flicker into being here and there, scattered through the water like brief, deliberate signals, each one created by a living organism rather than any external source. This phenomenon is known as bioluminescence, a process in which certain animals produce light through chemical reactions inside specialized cells or organs. Within these structures, compounds interact in a controlled way, releasing energy not as heat, but as visible light. The glow is often soft, sometimes sharp, and can be shaped, pulsed, or directed depending on the needs of the organism. It is a form of light that belongs entirely to life, generated from within rather than borrowed from the environment. In a place where natural illumination no longer exists, this ability becomes deeply practical. Light is not an accessory or an ornament. It is a tool that serves specific purposes, each one tied to survival in a world where visibility must be created rather than relied upon. Some animals use their glow to draw attention, producing gentle flashes or steady beacons that attract smaller organisms drifting through the dark. What appears as a harmless point of light can become an invitation, guiding prey toward a waiting mouth. Others use light in a more subtle way, not to reveal themselves, but to disappear. In the faint traces of light that still filter down from far above, silhouettes can form, making an animal visible from below as a dark shape against a dim background. To counter this, certain species produce light along their undersides, matching the weak illumination from above. This technique, known as counter-illumination, softens their outline, blending them into the faint glow and making them harder to detect. In this way, light becomes a form of concealment rather than exposure. There are also moments when light serves as a means of connection. In the vastness of the deep, where individuals may be separated by long distances, brief flashes or patterned glows can act as signals, helping organisms locate one another. These signals may carry information about identity or readiness, allowing encounters to occur in a place where chance alone would make them rare. The light becomes a language, simple yet effective, shaped by the needs of those who use it. Some creatures use sudden bursts of brightness as a form of distraction, releasing quick flashes or clouds of glowing material that linger in the water. These displays can confuse or redirect attention, creating a brief window in which the animal can move away. In a setting where movement is often limited and costly, even a small advantage can make a difference. What emerges from all of this is a landscape where light exists only because life creates it. The darkness remains complete, unchanged by any external source, yet within it, these points of illumination appear and vanish, each one tied to a living process. The ocean at this depth does not simply lack light. It becomes a place where light is manufactured, shaped, and used with precision. Over time, this creates a subtle transformation in how the environment is perceived. The absence of sunlight no longer defines the space entirely. Instead, it is punctuated by these living glows, scattered and purposeful, forming a shifting pattern that belongs only to this depth. The ocean here does not reflect the sky above. It generates its own quiet constellation from within. Forms begin to emerge, that seem almost unfinished at first glance, as though the process of shaping them has paused midway, leaving edges soft, proportions unfamiliar, and structures that do not align with the patterns seen closer to the surface. These bodies drift or hover with a kind of quiet precision, revealing designs that follow a different set of priorities, guided not by appearance, but by the demands of a place where resources are uncertain and encounters are rare. Many of these animals carry mouths that appear far larger than expected, extending wide across the front of the head, sometimes stretching beyond what would seem structurally necessary. Within them, teeth rise in long, narrow lines, thin and pointed, arranged not for tearing in rapid motion, but for holding firmly once contact is made. In an environment where opportunities to feed may come infrequently, the ability to secure whatever arrives becomes essential. A mouth that opens wide enough, paired with teeth that prevent escape, allows an animal to make use of moments that cannot be predicted or repeated. The structure of the jaw often reflects this same principle. Instead of rigid alignment, many species possess joints that allow the mouth to open at unusual angles, creating space for prey that might otherwise be too large to handle. The stomach, too, may expand beyond its resting size, stretching to accommodate a meal that represents not just immediate energy, but a reserve for an extended period. In this way, the body becomes a storage system as much as a feeding mechanism built to capture and retain rather than to process frequently. Along the length of these animals, fins can appear elongated or delicately extended, moving with slow, controlled motions that conserve energy. The water at these depths does not reward constant activity, and so movement is often reduced to what is necessary, guided by efficiency rather than speed. The extended forms help maintain position with minimal effort, allowing the animal to remain suspended or to drift with subtle adjustments, reducing the cost of staying in place. The surfaces of these bodies also reveal adaptations shaped by the absence of light. Some are nearly transparent, their internal structures faintly visible, blending into the surrounding water where little contrast exists. Others carry deep pigmentation, appearing black or dark red, tones that absorb what little light might pass through from above. In this environment, color does not serve display in the way it does near the surface. Instead, it becomes a method of concealment, reducing visibility in a world where being seen can carry consequences. What might appear fragile, with soft tissues and delicate outlines, is often a reflection of precise adjustment rather than weakness. Heavy structures and dense materials are not always necessary in a place where buoyancy can be balanced and movement is limited. By reducing weight and simplifying form, these animals conserve energy, maintaining only what is required to function within their surroundings. The result is a kind of quiet efficiency, where every feature contributes to survival without excess. Seen together, these characteristics create a visual impression that feels distant from the familiar patterns of life on land or in shallow water. Yet each detail follows a clear logic, shaped over long spans of time by the steady influence of darkness, pressure, and scarcity. The unusual proportions, the extended shapes, the muted or absent colors, all arise from the same underlying need to endure in a place where conditions differ so completely from those above. In this sense, what appears unfamiliar is not a departure from the natural order, but an expression of it under different circumstances. The forms that seem least like those of the surface are, in fact, closely aligned with the demands of their environment, reflecting a continuity of life that persists even as its outward appearance changes. Nothing in this depth arrives on a reliable schedule, and among the most uncertain of all is the simple presence of food. It does not grow here in steady fields or gather in predictable currents. Instead, nourishment appears irregularly, scattered through the water in ways that cannot be anticipated. Long intervals may pass with little to find, followed by brief moments when something drifts within reach. Life continues not by abundance, but by enduring these gaps. This scarcity becomes one of the quiet forces that shapes nearly every aspect of existence. Bodies are formed with restraint, carrying only what is necessary to function in an environment where energy cannot be spent freely. Movement is measured and deliberate, avoiding waste wherever possible. Even internal processes slow to match the limited supply, allowing organisms to stretch what they have over extended periods. The rhythm of life adjusts to this uneven flow, expanding and contracting around the availability of resources. Predators in this world do not have the luxury of choice. When an opportunity presents itself, hesitation carries a cost that cannot easily be recovered. The prey that passes by may be the only one encountered for a considerable span of time, and so the decision to act becomes immediate. Size, shape, or familiarity matter less than the simple fact of presence. A meal is defined not by preference, but by chance. This is reflected in the way many animals are able to consume prey that seems disproportionately large. Their bodies accommodate this through flexible structures, allowing them to take in organisms that approach their own size. Once captured, the meal becomes a reservoir, stored and processed gradually, sustaining the animal through the long interval that follows. In this way, feeding is not a frequent activity, but a significant event, one that must compensate for the absence of future certainty. Hunting itself follows a pattern shaped by these conditions. Rather than constant pursuit, many species rely on stillness, conserving energy while waiting for movement to come to them. The surrounding darkness, already complete, becomes an ally in this approach, reducing the need for active searching. A slight adjustment, a brief motion, can be enough when the moment finally arrives. The environment favors those who can remain patient, holding position until opportunity passes close enough to reach. Even among those that drift rather than hunt, the same principle applies. Anything that can be gathered is taken, whether it is a small organism, a fragment, or something that has fallen from far above. There is little distinction between what is ideal and what is simply available. Each piece contributes to survival, no matter how small, and nothing is disregarded. Over time, this creates a world where hunger is not a temporary condition, but a constant background presence. It does not always announce itself through urgency, but exists as an underlying influence, guiding behavior and shaping form. The organisms that persist here do so not by overcoming scarcity, but by aligning themselves with it, adjusting their lives to match its quiet demands. The result is a system that operates with a kind of restrained efficiency, where every action carries weight and every opportunity is used fully. There is no excess, no unnecessary movement, only the steady continuation of life within the limits set by an environment that offers little and asks much in return. Stillness becomes a method rather than an absence, a deliberate state held with care in a place where unnecessary motion carries a quiet cost. In this depth, movement is no longer constant or restless. It is restrained, shaped by an environment that rewards patience more than pursuit, and where distance can stretch encounters far apart. Many hunters here do not roam in search of prey across wide areas. The effort required to do so would exceed the uncertain return. Instead, they position themselves within the water or along the seafloor, settling into a kind of suspended readiness. Fins adjust in small, controlled motions, just enough to maintain balance against faint currents. Bodies align with the surrounding flow, reducing resistance and conserving what little energy can be spared. The result is a presence that seems almost fixed in place, yet remains fully aware of its surroundings. Drifting becomes one of the most efficient ways to exist within this space. Some animals allow themselves to move gently with the water, neither actively swimming nor completely passive, but maintaining a subtle control over direction and orientation. This slow passage carries them through the environment without the expense of constant propulsion. It is a way of traveling that blends motion with rest, allowing them to encounter what the currents bring rather than seeking it out. Others remain nearly motionless, hovering with remarkable precision. Their bodies are balanced so carefully that even the smallest adjustment can hold them steady. In this stillness, time stretches, and the act of waiting becomes central to survival. There is no urgency in their posture, no visible sign of tension, only a quiet readiness that persists without interruption. The surrounding darkness, already complete, conceals them without effort, allowing them to remain unnoticed until the moment arrives. When that moment comes, movement is brief and exact. A sudden shift, a rapid extension, a swift closing of distance that lasts only an instant. The action is not prolonged, not repeated in long chases, but executed with a precision that reflects careful timing. Energy is spent in a single, concentrated effort directed toward securing what has come within reach. Afterward, stillness returns just as quickly, restoring the balance that was briefly broken. This pattern shapes the rhythm of life here. Long intervals of quiet persistence are punctuated by short bursts of activity, each one measured and purposeful. The environment does not favor constant engagement, but rather the ability to remain poised between moments, conserving strength until it is needed. The difference between success and absence lies not in speed or endurance alone, but in the ability to recognize and act within a narrow window. Even the design of these animals reflects this approach. Their forms support hovering, their structures reduce drag, and their movements are adapted to minimize effort. Nothing is exaggerated beyond necessity. Each feature contributes to a system that balances stillness with sudden action, allowing them to exist within the constraints of their surroundings. Over time, this creates a world where motion is not continuous, but carefully distributed. The water itself may seem calm, yet within it, countless organisms are holding position, drifting, or waiting in quiet suspension. The absence of constant activity does not indicate emptiness, but a different pacing, one that aligns with the slow and irregular nature of opportunity. In this depth, the act of waiting becomes as significant as the act of moving. It is a strategy shaped by the conditions of the environment, one that allows life to persist without excess. The ocean here is not defined by speed, but by restraint, where each movement is chosen and each pause holds its own purpose. Far above the depths we have entered, a vast movement unfolds each day without drawing attention, a slow and continuous exchange between layers that rarely appears at the surface. It does not resemble the migrations known on land, where herds cross open terrain or flocks trace visible paths across the sky. This movement is concealed within the water itself, rising and sinking in a pattern so widespread that it passes unnoticed by most of the world above. As evening settles across the ocean's surface, countless small animals begin to ascend. They emerge from deeper waters and move upward toward layers where faint remnants of light once shaped life more strongly. The motion is gradual and coordinated, not directed by any central force, but guided by a shared sensitivity to the changing conditions of the environment. Tiny crustaceans, gelatinous drifters, and small fish all take part, forming a vast upward flow that spreads across entire ocean basins. With the arrival of night, the upper layers become a place of opportunity. Organisms that feed on microscopic life find richer concentrations closer to the surface, where energy from above has supported growth during the day. The journey upward allows them to access this temporary abundance, to gather what they can before the conditions shift again. The ascent is not rushed, but steady, unfolding over hours as the water darkens. When morning returns, the movement reverses. Those same animals begin to descend, slipping back into deeper water where the darkness offers a measure of protection. The upper layers, once filled with motion during the night, gradually empty as the migration flows downward. The cycle repeats with remarkable consistency, a daily rhythm that continues across seasons and across vast distances. This vertical migration is among the largest movements of life on the planet, not in the size of individual creatures, but in their number. Billions upon billions of organisms participate, forming a hidden procession that travels through the water column each day. It is a movement measured not in visible trails, but in the collective shift of living mass between depths. The deep ocean, often imagined as still and unchanging, is quietly shaped by this continual exchange. Layers that seem isolated are connected through these daily journeys, carrying energy and matter upward and downward in a steady flow. Predators follow this movement, positioning themselves along the paths where ascending or descending organisms pass. In this way, the migration influences not only those who travel, but also those who wait. There is a subtle precision to this rhythm, guided by light levels that are barely perceptible and by internal cycles that align with the passage of time above. Even in regions where sunlight never fully reaches, the pattern persists, echoing changes that occur far overhead. The ocean, though divided into layers, remains linked by these shared signals, allowing life to move between them in coordinated ways. The scale of this movement is difficult to grasp from the surface, where the water appears calm and uninterrupted. Yet beneath that appearance, an immense circulation of life is underway, rising and falling with each passing day. The paths are not marked, the travelers rarely seen, and the motion leaves no lasting trace, yet it continues without pause. Within this hidden migration, the deep sea reveals another dimension of its character. It is not only a place of stillness and waiting, but also one of quiet motion, where entire communities shift position in response to subtle changes. The ocean does not remain fixed in its layers, but breathes through this daily exchange, drawing life upward and returning it downward in a continuous, unseen cycle. Long after the surface has slipped beyond reach, something continues to fall through the water, a slow and constant descent that never fully stops. It does not arrive in large, sudden pieces, but in a fine, scattered drift, made of fragments so small they seem almost weightless. These particles move gently downward, guided by gravity and the quiet currents that pass through the depths, forming a steady rain that connects distant layers of the ocean. This drifting material is often called marine snow, a name that reflects its appearance more than its origin. It is not frozen or crystalline, but composed of organic remains that begin far above, in waters once filled with light and motion. Tiny plants that lived near the surface, microscopic animals that fed upon them, and the waste produced by larger creatures all contribute to this falling mixture. Mucus-like secretions bind these fragments together, forming soft clumps that sink slowly, changing shape as they descend. As these particles travel downward, they become the primary source of nourishment for much of the life below. In regions where fresh food rarely appears, this constant, delicate rain provides a link to the energy that originated near the surface. It is not abundant in any single moment, but its persistence allows it to sustain a wide range of organisms over time. Each fragment carries a small amount of stored energy, and together they create a continuous supply that supports life across vast areas of the seafloor. The descent of marine snow is gradual, often taking days or longer to reach the depths. Along the way, some of it is intercepted, consumed by animals suspended in the water column, or broken apart into even finer pieces. What remains continues its journey, settling onto the seafloor in a thin, ever-changing layer. There, it becomes available to those that live close to the sediment, where movement is limited and resources are sparse. This process creates a subtle connection between worlds that are otherwise separated by distance and conditions. The surface, shaped by sunlight and constant activity, produces material that eventually feeds regions where those influences no longer reach. The deep ocean, in turn, depends on this distant production, receiving it in a form that has been altered by time and travel. It is a relationship that unfolds without direct interaction, yet remains essential to the continuity of life below. The organisms that rely on this falling material have adapted to make use of what arrives. Some sift through the sediment, gathering particles that have settled. Others capture fragments as they drift past, using delicate structures to collect what the currents bring. There is little distinction between types of food in this context. Each piece, no matter how small, contributes to survival, and nothing is disregarded. Over long periods, the accumulation of this material shapes the very landscape of the seafloor, forming layers that record the passage of time in fine detail. These layers build slowly, preserving traces of what once existed above, carried downward through this continuous rain. The process is quiet and steady, unfolding without interruption. In this environment, the idea of abundance takes on a different meaning. It is not found in large gatherings or sudden events, but in the persistence of small contributions over time. The deep ocean is sustained by what falls from afar, a constant reminder that even in isolation, it remains connected to a distant, brighter world through this gentle, unending descent. Far above the depths, an immense body loses its buoyancy and begins a slow descent, moving downward through layers it once crossed with ease. The motion is unhurried, guided by gravity and the quiet resistance of the water, carrying with it a dense store of energy that will not remain contained for long. By the time it reaches the seafloor, what arrives is not simply a body at rest, but the beginning of a transformation that will unfold over years. In a place where nourishment often arrives in fragments, this sudden abundance creates a rare concentration of opportunity. The arrival does not go unnoticed. Chemical traces spread outward through the water, subtle signals that travel farther than any visible sign. From surrounding areas, animals begin to gather, drawn not by sight, but by the faint presence of what has settled below. The first to arrive are often the larger scavengers, capable of moving across the seafloor in search of such events. They approach steadily, consuming the soft tissues that are most accessible. This stage unfolds with a sense of quiet efficiency, each visitor taking part in a process that reduces the mass over time. The body that once moved through open water becomes a shared resource, gradually reshaped by those that depend on it. As the initial stage progresses, smaller organisms begin to take part. where larger feeders leave behind fragments, others arrive to make use of what remains. The surface of the carcass becomes a site of increasing activity, with different species occupying different positions, each contributing to the breakdown in their own way. The process continues without interruption, shifting from one group to another as conditions change. Eventually, the remaining structure is composed largely of bone, dense and resistant, yet still holding energy within its matrix. At this stage, a different set of specialists emerges, organisms adapted to access what lies within the bones themselves. Some bore into the surface, while others host symbiotic microbes that allow them to draw nourishment from compounds locked deep inside. What appears inert from a distance continues to sustain life, supporting communities that are rarely seen elsewhere. Microbial activity becomes increasingly important as the transformation continues. Bacteria and other microorganisms break down materials at a chemical level, releasing compounds that can be used by other forms of life. This stage extends the influence of the original body far beyond its visible presence, allowing it to support organisms long after its structure has diminished. Over time, the site changes in character. What began as a single, intact form becomes a dispersed system, with life distributed across the surrounding sediment. The energy contained within the original body has been transferred through multiple layers of consumption and transformation, sustaining a sequence of communities that replace one another gradually. The process does not end quickly. It unfolds across years, sometimes longer, depending on conditions and location. In this way, the descent of a single large animal creates a localized ecosystem, one that operates on a timescale different from the fleeting encounters that define much of the deep ocean. It provides continuity in a place where resources are often uncertain, allowing life to gather, persist, and transition in a steady progression. What begins at the surface as the end of one life becomes, in the depths, the beginning of many others. The transformation is not abrupt or chaotic, but structured and sustained, guided by the interactions of organisms that are adapted to make use of what arrives. The deep ocean, shaped by scarcity, receives this rare event and extends its influence across time, turning a single descent into a long, unfolding presence within the dark. Weight gathers silently with depth, not as a sudden force, but as a continuous accumulation, layer upon layer pressing downward through the water. Every meter adds more to what rests below, until the ocean itself becomes a column of immense mass, extending upward far beyond what can be sensed directly. In these lower regions, that weight is no longer abstract. It surrounds everything, pressing from all sides at once with a steady, unyielding presence. Pressure, in its simplest form, is the result of this weight. It is the force created by all the water above, bearing down on what lies beneath. Near the surface, it is barely noticed, balanced by the conditions in which most familiar life has developed. But as depth increases, the pressure rises in direct relation, becoming stronger with each step downward. At great depths, it reaches levels that would collapse structures not designed to endure it. Air-filled spaces are especially vulnerable under such conditions. Gas compresses when subjected to increasing pressure, shrinking in volume as the force around it grows. Cavities that function easily near the surface begin to deform, then fail entirely. For this reason, the bodies of many deep-sea organisms avoid relying on trapped air. Instead, they are composed largely of materials that do not compress in the same way, allowing them to remain stable even as the surrounding force increases. This same principle explains why human exploration of the deep is so difficult. Submersible vessels, must be built with thick, carefully engineered structures to withstand the immense pressure outside. Any weakness can lead to rapid collapse as the surrounding water moves inward with overwhelming force. Equipment must function reliably under conditions that leave little margin for error, where the environment exerts constant stress on every surface. Yet the animals that live in these depths are not surviving through resistance in the way machines do. They are not stronger in a simple sense, nor do they withstand pressure through rigid defenses. Instead, their bodies are arranged in ways that make the pressure less disruptive. Their internal fluids match the density of the surrounding water, reducing the difference between inside and outside. Their tissues are flexible, able to maintain function without relying on empty spaces that could be compressed. At the molecular level, even the chemistry of their cells is adapted to these conditions. Proteins, the structures that carry out essential functions within living organisms, can lose their shape under high pressure. Deep-sea species possess variations that remain stable, allowing processes to continue where they would otherwise fail. Membranes, which enclose cells and regulate exchange, are also adjusted to maintain their properties despite the surrounding force. In this way, survival is not achieved by opposing the environment, but by aligning with it. The organisms that inhabit these depths do not resist the pressure as an external threat. They exist within it, their forms and functions shaped to operate under its constant influence. What would be destructive to surface life becomes, for them, a normal condition. The result is a world where the physical limits familiar at higher levels no longer apply in the same way. Structures that would collapse elsewhere remain intact because they are built without the vulnerabilities that pressure exploits. Processes that would fail continue because they have been tuned to these conditions over long spans of time. Here, the ocean does not simply impose its weight. It defines the possibilities of life itself, shaping every detail from the smallest molecular interaction to the overall form of the organism. Existence is not a matter of enduring this force, but of belonging within it, as though the pressure is not an obstacle, but a foundation upon which life is quietly sustained. Edges lose their firmness here, as though the idea of solidity has been gently set aside in favor of something more yielding. Bodies do not always present clear boundaries or rigid outlines. Instead, many appear soft, their shapes subtly shifting with the movement of the water as if they are part of the surrounding medium rather than distinct from it. What might seem incomplete at first begins to reveal a different kind of precision, one that does not rely on hardness or weight. In shallower environments, strength is often associated with dense structures and powerful motion. Muscles drive continuous movement, and skeletons provide firm support against gravity and impact. But in this depth, those demands are altered. The water itself offers support from all sides, reducing the need for heavy frameworks to maintain form. Gravity is still present, yet its effect is balanced by buoyancy, allowing organisms to exist in a state that does not require constant effort to remain suspended. Neutral buoyancy becomes a quiet advantage. By matching their density closely to that of the surrounding water, many deep-sea animals achieve a kind of equilibrium, neither sinking nor rising without intention. This balance allows them to remain in place or drift with minimal energy expenditure. Instead of pushing against their environment, they move within it, guided by small adjustments rather than sustained force. Soft tissues play a central role in this arrangement. Without the need for rigid support, bodies can remain flexible, conserving energy that would otherwise be used to build and maintain heavier structures. This flexibility also allows them to withstand subtle changes in their surroundings without damage, bending rather than breaking, adapting in form without losing function. The absence of hardness is not a lack, but a choice shaped by the conditions in which they live. Musculature, too, reflects this economy. Rather than supporting constant activity, it is arranged for brief, controlled movements. Sudden actions can still occur when needed, but they are not sustained over long periods. The emphasis is on efficiency, on using only what is required at the precise moment it becomes necessary. In between, stillness returns, supported by the balance already established. To an observer accustomed to surface life, these forms may appear delicate, even vulnerable. Their bodies lack the visible strength associated with more familiar creatures, and their movements seem restrained. Yet this appearance can be misleading. What seems fragile is often highly adapted, refined to operate within a narrow range of conditions with remarkable effectiveness. Every feature is aligned with the environment, reducing excess and focusing on function. This creates a different kind of strength, one that is not expressed through force or resistance, but through alignment and precision. The organism does not oppose its surroundings, but works with them, allowing the properties of the environment to support its existence. In doing so, it reduces the need for internal reinforcement, relying instead on balance and proportion. The overall impression is one of subtlety rather than solidity. Forms are shaped by currents rather than by weight, by equilibrium rather than by structure. The deep ocean becomes a place where life is not constructed as a barrier against the environment, but as a system that moves in harmony with it. In this context, what appears unfinished is in fact carefully resolved. A design that has removed what is unnecessary and retained only what serves a purpose. The result is a kind of quiet refinement, where survival is achieved not through excess, but through a precise correspondence between form and condition. Color does not vanish all at once in the descent, but it changes its meaning until it no longer behaves in ways that feel familiar. What begins as a world rich with variation slowly simplifies, not because color ceases to exist, but because the light required to reveal it is no longer present in full. Each wavelength is filtered out in its own time, leaving behind a palette shaped not by the animals themselves, but by the physics of the water above them. Among the first to fade is red. It is absorbed quickly as depth increases, disappearing long before other colors follow. An object that appears vivid near the surface loses that intensity as it descends, its red tones slipping into darkness until they can no longer be distinguished. In these depths, a red body does not appear bright or noticeable. Instead, it becomes nearly indistinguishable from black, blending into the surrounding water where little light remains to reflect from its surface. This creates a quiet advantage. Animals that carry deep red pigmentation are not displaying themselves, but concealing their presence. In the absence of the wavelengths needed to reveal that color, they become effectively invisible against the darkness. What might seem like a bold choice near the surface becomes, at depth, a form of camouflage shaped by the way light behaves as it travels downward. Black pigmentation follows a similar logic, though its effect is more direct. Surfaces that absorb nearly all available light reduce the chance of reflection, making them harder to detect in a dim environment. In a place where even the smallest reflection can reveal a presence, the ability to remain visually muted becomes valuable. Many organisms adopt this strategy, their bodies appearing as silhouettes that do not catch or scatter the limited light that reaches them. Higher in the water column, where faint illumination still persists, other strategies emerge. Transparency becomes one of the most effective ways to avoid detection, allowing an animal to pass through its surroundings with minimal visual signature. By reducing the difference between body and environment, transparency removes the outlines that might otherwise reveal form. Internal structures may still be present, but they are arranged in ways that minimize contrast, allowing the organism to remain difficult to discern. Reflective surfaces also play a role in these intermediate layers. Some animals carry structures that mirror the light around them, scattering it in ways that disrupt their outline. Rather than absorbing or transmitting light, they redirect it, blending into the shifting patterns of the water. This approach relies on the presence of at least some illumination, using it to create a kind of visual ambiguity that makes detection less certain. As depth increases further, these strategies shift again, aligning with the near absence of light. The importance of color as a means of display or recognition diminishes, replaced by its function in concealment. What matters is not how an organism appears in full light, but how it is perceived in conditions where visibility is limited or absent. Color becomes less about expression and more about interaction with the environment. In this setting, the familiar associations of color no longer apply. Brightness, contrast, and hue lose their usual significance, replaced by a system governed by absorption, reflection, and the gradual loss of wavelengths. The ocean does not simply darken with depth. It reorganizes the way light exists, and with it, the way color is experienced. The result is a world where appearance is shaped by conditions rather than intention, where even the simplest visual qualities follow rules that differ from those above. What remains is a quiet transformation, one that alters not only what can be seen, but how seeing itself functions within the deep. Beyond the last slopes and descending ridges, the seafloor opens into a breadth that resists easy framing, a horizontal expanse that extends far past any single point of view. There are no towering structures to interrupt it, no sudden rises or sharp breaks in elevation, only a gradual continuity that stretches outward in all directions. This is the domain of the abyssal plains, one of the most extensive landscapes on the planet, yet one that remains largely unseen. These plains occupy vast portions of the ocean floor, covering areas that rival continents in scale. Their reach is not defined by dramatic features, but by their quiet uniformity. The ground is composed of fine sediment, particles that have settled slowly over immense spans of time, forming a soft and even surface. Each layer rests upon the last, creating a record of distant processes that have unfolded far above. The environment here is shaped by stillness. Movement is minimal, carried only by faint currents that pass gently over the surface without disturbing it. The water remains cold and dark, maintaining conditions that change little over time. There are no shifting shadows, no variation in light, only a consistent absence that defines the space. The landscape does not draw attention to itself. It exists with a kind of quiet persistence, unchanged in its broad form. At first glance, it can appear empty, as though nothing occupies this wide and level ground. The absence of large, visible structures reinforces this impression, creating a sense of openness that feels almost complete. Yet within this apparent simplicity, life is present, distributed in ways that do not immediately reveal themselves. It does not gather in dense clusters or form striking patterns, but exists in subtle, scattered forms across the sediment. Sea cucumbers move slowly along the surface, processing the fine material as they travel, extracting what little nourishment it contains. Worms inhabit the sediment itself, their bodies adapted to burrow through the soft layers, interacting with the material that surrounds them. Brittle stars extend their arms outward, positioned to sense and capture passing particles. Microbial communities operate at scales too small to be seen directly, yet they play a central role in transforming the organic matter that arrives. Scavengers also traverse these plains, moving between areas where resources become available. Their presence is not constant in any one place, but part of a broader pattern that unfolds across the landscape. Each organism contributes to a system that is steady rather than dynamic, where processes occur at a pace that aligns with the slow arrival of material from above. The scale of this environment influences how it is perceived. Its vastness does not announce itself through height or depth, but through extension, through the knowledge that what lies ahead continues far beyond what can be observed. The silence that accompanies it is not absolute, but it is pervasive, shaped by the absence of large disturbances and the limited movement within the space. This combination of scale and subtlety gives the abyssal plains a character that is easily overlooked. Without dramatic features or rapid changes, they do not immediately capture attention. Yet they represent one of the largest habitats on Earth, supporting life that persists under conditions of remarkable consistency. In this quiet expanse, the ocean reveals a different form of presence, one that does not rely on intensity or contrast. It is a landscape defined by continuity, where life exists in forms that match the calm and even nature of their surroundings. The abyssal plains remain one of the most extensive and least noticed expressions of the deep ocean's enduring complexity. A change in elevation begins almost imperceptibly, the even ground giving way to a slow rise that gathers height over distance until the seafloor no longer feels level. What once stretched outward without interruption now lifts, folds, and breaks into forms that resemble a submerged landscape of ridges and slopes. The stillness remains, yet the terrain itself becomes more varied, revealing that the deep is not confined to flat expanses, but shaped by structures that carry their own quiet scale. Underwater mountains rise from the sea floor with broad bases and gradual inclines, their summits extending into higher layers of the ocean. These features, often formed by volcanic processes or tectonic activity, create points where the otherwise uniform environment is altered. As water moves across these elevations, its flow is redirected, lifted, and sometimes slowed, changing the distribution of particles and organisms carried within it. Ridges extend across long distances, forming boundaries that guide movement along their length. They are not always sharply defined, but their presence influences how currents travel through the surrounding water. Where these flows meet the rising terrain, subtle interactions occur, bringing suspended material into contact with the slopes. This interaction creates areas where nourishment becomes more available, allowing life to gather in greater density than in the open plains. Cliffs and escarpments introduce sharper changes, where the seafloor drops away more abruptly. These vertical faces interrupt the horizontal continuity, creating sheltered regions and channels where water can circulate differently. Particles that drift through the water column may become concentrated along these surfaces, settling or being held in place by shifting currents. In these locations, organisms find conditions that support more consistent feeding opportunities. Canyons cut into the seafloor, forming long, narrow pathways that descend between elevated structures. Their walls guide the movement of water, directing flows through confined spaces where speed and direction can vary. Material that enters these channels may be carried along their length, accumulating in areas where the current slows. These features create corridors of activity, linking different parts of the deep ocean through the movement of water and the resources it carries. Together, these formations create a landscape that is far from uniform. The deep ocean floor holds a geography shaped by forces that have acted over immense spans of time, producing variations in height and structure that influence the distribution of life. The presence of elevation changes the environment in subtle but important ways, altering how energy and material move through the system. Where the terrain rises or falls, the interaction between water and surface becomes more complex. Currents that pass over a flat plain behave differently when they encounter a slope or a ridge. They may lift upward, carrying particles with them, or slow as they meet resistance, allowing suspended material to settle. These changes create localized areas where food becomes more concentrated, supporting communities that are more diverse and active than those found in more uniform regions. The organisms that inhabit these areas take advantage of these conditions, positioning themselves where the flow brings resources within reach. Some attach to surfaces, using the passing current to deliver nourishment. Others move along the contours of the terrain, following the pathways where material accumulates. The structure of the seafloor shapes not only where life exists, but how it behaves. Seen in this way, the deep ocean reveals a landscape that carries its own form of grandeur. It does not rely on light or color to define its features, but on the scale and arrangement of its forms. Mountains rise without being seen from above. Canyons extend through darkness, and ridges guide the movement of water across vast distances. The bottom of the ocean, often imagined as simple and uniform, holds within it a complexity that mirrors the diversity of land. Its terrain, though hidden, creates a framework within which life organizes itself, forming patterns that reflect both the structure of the environment and the quiet processes that sustain it. From fractures in the seafloor, the water begins to rise again, altered by a journey that has carried it deep into the crust and back. It returns not as the same cold fluid that once sank downward, but transformed, heated by the planet's interior and enriched with dissolved minerals and chemicals. Where it emerges, the surrounding darkness is broken not by light, but by motion and heat, forming sites that feel distinct from the wider seafloor. These hydrothermal vents occur where seawater seeps into cracks within the oceanic crust, descending until it reaches regions warmed by underlying geological activity. As it moves through these heated zones, the water interacts with the surrounding rock, dissolving elements and accumulating compounds along the way. When it rises again, it carries this altered chemistry back into the ocean, releasing it through openings that can form towering structures or diffuse flows across the sediment. The fluid that emerges can be much warmer than the surrounding water, creating gradients that define the immediate environment. Minerals precipitate as the hot water meets the cold, forming chimney-like features that grow over time. Around these structures, the water carries substances that would otherwise be scarce in the deep ocean, creating localized conditions unlike those found in the surrounding plains. At the foundation of these systems are microbes that do not depend on sunlight for energy. Instead of drawing from light-driven processes, they use the chemical compounds released by the vents, converting them into energy through reactions that sustain their growth. This process, known as chemosynthesis, forms the base of a food web that operates independently of the surface world. It is a system built on chemistry rather than light, drawing directly from the Earth's internal processes. This realization reshaped how life in the deep ocean is understood. For a long time, it was assumed that nearly all ecosystems ultimately relied on sunlight as their primary energy source. The existence of communities, sustained entirely by chemical energy, demonstrated that life could persist under conditions that were once considered limiting. It revealed that the requirements for life are broader than previously imagined, extending into environments where light plays no role at all. Around these microbial foundations, larger organisms gather, forming dense communities that contrast sharply with the surrounding seafloor. Tube worms anchor themselves near the vents, their bodies elongated and often clustered together, housing symbiotic microbes within their tissues. Clams and mussels settle nearby, also relying on internal or associated bacteria to process the chemicals present in the water. Shrimp move through the currents, navigating the gradients between hot vent fluid and the colder ocean, interacting with the microbial life that forms the base of the system. These animals are not simply visitors to the vents. Their bodies and behaviors are closely tied to the conditions present there, adapted to the temperature variations and chemical composition of the environment. They occupy a narrow range, where the balance between heat and chemistry supports their existence, forming communities that are both stable and localized. The presence of these vent systems introduces a different pattern into the deep ocean, one where life is concentrated around sources of chemical energy rather than dispersed across wide areas. The contrast between these sites and the surrounding seafloor highlights the diversity of environments that exist within the deep. In these places, the Earth itself becomes an active participant in sustaining life, providing not only the setting, but also the energy that supports it. The vents represent a convergence of geological and biological processes, where the planet's internal heat and chemistry give rise to ecosystems that function independently of the surface. Within the broader expanse of the ocean, these sites stand as distinct centers of activity, revealing that life can emerge and persist under conditions that differ fundamentally from those shaped by sunlight. Not all places where chemistry gathers are marked by heat or rising plumes. In some regions of the seafloor, the water remains cold and still, yet something unseen escapes from beneath, seeping slowly through sediments and fractures. These areas do not announce themselves with motion or temperature, but with the quiet release of gases and fluids that alter the surrounding environment in more subtle ways. These are known as cold seeps, locations where compounds such as methane and hydrogen sulfide move upward from deeper layers of the earth and enter the ocean. The flow is often gentle, spreading through the seafloor rather than erupting from it, creating patches where the chemistry of the water differs from the surrounding plain. The changes are not immediately visible from a distance, yet they shape the conditions closely around them. As these chemicals rise, they provide a source of energy for microscopic life. Microbes gather at these sites, using the compounds in reactions that allow them to grow and reproduce without relying on sunlight. Their activity forms the base of a system that parallels, yet differs, from the one found near hydrothermal vents. The process is slower, more diffuse, but still capable of supporting complex communities over time. Around these microbial foundations, larger organisms establish themselves in patterns that reflect the available chemistry. Clams and mussels often dominate these areas, their bodies hosting symbiotic bacteria that process the chemicals for them. Their shells cluster across the seafloor, marking the extent of the seep with quiet density. Tube worms may also appear, extending upward from the sediment, their forms shaped by the need to access both the chemical source below and the surrounding water above. The pace of activity here is different from that of hotter systems. Without the strong temperature gradients that define vent environments, the interactions unfold more gradually. The seep does not build tall mineral structures or produce visible plumes. Instead, it alters the sediment itself, creating zones where life can take hold and persist over long periods. The boundary between seep and surrounding seafloor is often soft, blending into the wider environment rather than standing apart from it. Despite this subtlety, the communities that form are rich and sustained. They rely on the steady release of chemicals, drawing energy from processes that originate beneath the seafloor. In this way, they share a fundamental similarity with vent ecosystems, yet they express it through different conditions and rhythms. The absence of heat does not reduce their significance. It simply shapes the manner in which life organizes itself around the available resources. These cold seeps reveal that the deep ocean holds multiple pathways for sustaining life, each rooted in the planet's internal chemistry. The reliance on sunlight, once considered essential, becomes only one of several possibilities. Beneath the surface, systems emerge that operate independently, connected more closely to geological processes than to the cycles above. As these seep communities persist, they contribute to a broader understanding of the deep ocean as a network of distinct yet related environments. Each site reflects a variation in how energy is made available and how life responds to it. The differences are not isolated, but part of a larger pattern that extends across the seafloor. Through these quiet leaks, the ocean reveals another layer of its complexity. It is not defined by a single mode of existence, but by multiple systems that coexist, each shaped by the conditions in which it arises. The deeper the descent continues, the more apparent it becomes that the seafloor is not governed by one set of rules, but by several, each unfolding in its own restrained and persistent way. Far below the plains and ridges, the seafloor does not simply continue downward in gentle slopes. Instead, it gives way to long, narrow depressions that extend deeper than any other part of the ocean, places where the surface of the planet itself bends and sinks into the mantle below. These formations are known as trenches, and they mark the deepest points within the global ocean. They are created where sections of the Earth's crust meet and one is forced beneath the other, a slow and continuous process that shapes the outer layers of the planet. As one plate descends, it pulls the seafloor downward with it, forming a steep and elongated trough. This motion unfolds over immense spans of time, yet its result is a feature that stands apart from all others in depth and structure. A trench does not appear as a single pit or isolated drop, but as a vast linear cut that stretches across hundreds or even thousands of kilometers. Its sides slope downward into a central axis that reaches extreme depths, far beyond the surrounding seafloor. The transition into a trench can feel gradual at first, but the descent continues until the environment enters a range that is unlike any other within the ocean. These regions are not simply deeper versions of what lies above. They are environments where conditions become more intense, more confined, and more removed from the broader patterns of the ocean. The walls of the trench create a sense of enclosure, guiding movement along its length while limiting exchange with the surrounding waters. The depth itself isolates these spaces, placing them at the farthest reach of the ocean's vertical range. In these depths, the weight of the overlying water reaches its greatest extent, pressing downward with a force that defines every aspect of the environment. The temperature remains low and stable, and the absence of light is complete. The distance from the surface is so great that the processes occurring above feel distant, their influence reduced to the slow and indirect movement of material over time. The scale of these trenches carries a quiet significance. They represent not just deep water, but the deepest environments on Earth, places where the limits of the ocean are most fully expressed. Their existence reveals that the seafloor is not a uniform boundary, but a landscape that continues downward into regions of increasing extremity. Within this setting, The sense of distance is not only horizontal, but vertical, measured in the depth of the water column above. The trench floor lies beneath a vast volume of ocean, separated from the surface by layers that have been left behind in the descent. The connection remains, yet it is attenuated, carried through slow processes that link even the most distant parts of the ocean. These trenches can be understood as the final stage of the descent, the point at which the seafloor reaches its greatest depth and the environment approaches its most extreme conditions. They form a boundary within the ocean, not in the sense of a limit that cannot be crossed, but as a threshold that marks the deepest expression of the planet's structure beneath the sea. In this way, trenches stand as a kind of frontier within the ocean, not defined by distance alone, but by the intensity of the conditions they contain. They are the places where the descent reaches its full extent, where the seafloor opens to its deepest form, and where the ocean reveals the farthest reaches of its hidden landscape. At the very base of these long descending cuts, the environment settles into conditions that narrow the range of what can persist. Not everything that inhabits the broader deep is able to continue downward into this final layer. Many forms that move easily across plains or along slopes simply do not appear here, their structures and processes unsuited to the extremes that define the trench floor. What remains is a smaller set of organisms, each one closely matched to a place where the limits of the ocean are most pronounced. Life in these depths is often described as hadal, a term that reflects both the location and the conditions that shape it. The animals that occupy this zone are not numerous in the way surface communities can be, nor do they form dense gatherings across wide areas. Instead, they exist in scattered populations, their presence tied to very specific tolerances that allow them to function where others cannot. Among the most notable of these inhabitants are snailfish, small and softly structured vertebrates that move through the trench environment with a quiet, unhurried motion. Their bodies lack the rigid appearance often associated with fish, appearing instead as gently formed shapes that respond to the surrounding water. They do not rely on heavy bones or strong musculature, but on a composition that allows them to remain stable under conditions that would disrupt more solid forms. Alongside them are invertebrates that move across the sediment or inhabit it just beneath the surface. Amphipods, worms, and other small organisms make use of the material that accumulates in these depths, continuing the slow processes of feeding and transformation that define much of the deep ocean. Their forms are often simple, yet their internal systems are precisely suited to the environment in which they exist. What is striking about these animals is not their size or outward strength, but their refinement. They do not present themselves as dominant or imposing. Instead, they appear almost understated, their bodies shaped by a need to function efficiently within a narrow range of conditions. The absence of large, imposing forms challenges expectations that the deepest parts of the ocean might be occupied by massive or heavily armored creatures. The adaptations that allow life to persist here operate at levels that are not always visible. The chemistry within their cells, the stability of their proteins, and the composition of their membranes all contribute to their ability to exist under extreme pressure. These changes are subtle in appearance, yet essential in function, allowing processes to continue where they would otherwise fail. Movement remains limited and deliberate, consistent with the broader patterns of the deep. The animals that live here do not engage in prolonged activity, but conserve their energy, responding only when necessary. Their interactions with the environment are shaped by the same principles that govern other depths, yet intensified by the conditions present at the trench floor. In this setting, the idea of what a deep-sea organism should look like begins to shift. the expectation of size or intensity gives way to a recognition of precision and specialization. The deepest living animals are not defined by dramatic features, but by their ability to exist where very few others can. The trench floor becomes a place where life is expressed in its most focused form, each organism representing a narrow solution to a set of demanding conditions. The forms that appear here may seem modest, even fragile, yet they reflect a long process of adjustment that allows them to persist at the farthest reach of the ocean's depth. Scale shifts again in the deep, but not always toward smallness. In certain corners of this environment, forms appear that seem enlarged beyond expectation, as though the same patterns seen in shallow waters have been stretched into unfamiliar proportions. The change is not universal, nor does it follow a single rule, yet it appears often enough to create a quiet sense that size itself behaves differently here. Among the most striking examples are giant isopods, relatives of small crustaceans that live near the surface, yet here they reach lengths that place them among the more substantial inhabitants of the seafloor. Their bodies are segmented and armored, with overlapping plates that curve gently along their length. They move slowly across the sediment, their presence steady rather than hurried, their scale lending them a distinct weight within the landscape. Amphipods, too, can appear in forms that exceed what might be expected from their relatives above. These creatures, often associated with smaller sizes in other environments, take on larger proportions in certain deep regions. Their bodies remain flexible and adapted for movement along or through the sediment, yet their increased size gives them a more pronounced presence within their surroundings. The reasons for this tendency toward larger size are not singular, but emerge from a combination of conditions that shape life in these depths. The cold environment slows metabolic processes, allowing organisms to grow over extended periods without the rapid cycles seen in warmer waters. Growth may take longer, but it continues steadily, resulting in forms that reach sizes not commonly seen elsewhere. Life histories also play a role. With fewer disturbances and a slower pace of change, some organisms persist for longer spans, accumulating size over time. The absence of frequent predation in certain areas can further allow this growth to proceed without interruption, creating opportunities for individuals to reach greater dimensions. At the same time, the availability of food, though often limited, can arrive in concentrated events. When resources do appear, organisms capable of storing or making use of them effectively may benefit from larger body sizes. The ability to process and retain energy over longer periods becomes an advantage, aligning with the irregular nature of nourishment in the deep. These larger forms stand in contrast to the more delicate organisms found in the deepest trenches. Where those animals are shaped by extreme specialization and refined simplicity, the giants of the deep present a different expression of adaptation. Their bodies carry a sense of presence that seems at odds with the quiet, sparse environment, yet they are no less suited to the conditions in which they exist. The coexistence of these scales creates a landscape where size is not fixed to a single expectation. Small, fragile forms and larger, more substantial ones occupy the same broader environment, each adapted to different aspects of the conditions around them. The result is a biological pattern that does not follow a simple progression, but instead reflects multiple responses to the same underlying constraints. In this setting, the deep ocean reveals another layer of its complexity. It is not only a place where life becomes reduced or simplified, but also one where certain forms expand beyond familiar limits. The presence of these larger organisms introduces a subtle distortion in scale, a reminder that the rules governing size are shaped by the environment in ways that are not always immediately apparent. This variation in form and proportion contributes to the sense that the deep is not bound by the expectations formed at the surface. It allows for a range of expressions, from the most delicate to the unexpectedly large, each one fitting within a system that continues to adapt to the conditions of depth, cold, and time. Across these depths, distance is not only measured in meters, but in the rarity of encounter. Individuals may pass through their entire lives without crossing paths with another of their kind, the vastness between them filled with darkness and slow movement. In such a setting, reproduction becomes less about timing and more about the challenge of connection, a problem shaped by separation as much as by biology. To persist here, life develops ways to bridge that distance, often through signals that can travel farther than a body can move. Chemical cues drift through the water, faint traces released by one organism and carried outward by currents. These signals do not move quickly, yet they extend the presence of the individual beyond its immediate location, allowing others to detect and follow gradients that lead, eventually, to their source. The process is uncertain, yet it provides a means of locating one another in an environment where direct searching would be inefficient. Light also becomes a method of communication, not in broad illumination, but in controlled flashes or patterns that stand out against the surrounding darkness. These signals are often brief and specific, shaped in ways that distinguish one species from another. In the absence of daylight, even a small point of light can carry meaning, marking presence, identity, or readiness. The signal does not travel far in absolute terms, but within the stillness of the deep, it can be enough. Encounters, when they occur, are infrequent and significant. The opportunity to reproduce may arise only rarely, and so the strategies that support it are often highly specialized. Some species rely on synchronized behaviors, aligning their reproductive cycles with environmental cues that increase the likelihood of meeting others at the same time. Others release gametes into the water, allowing fertilization to occur without direct contact, though this method depends on proximity and timing that are not always guaranteed. In certain cases, evolution has taken a more direct approach to ensuring that reproduction can occur when the chance presents itself. Among some deep-sea anglerfish, a unique strategy has developed in which the male, much smaller than the female, attaches himself to her body. Upon finding a mate, he bites into her tissue, forming a connection that gradually integrates their circulatory systems. Over time, his independent existence diminishes, and he becomes a permanent source of reproductive cells, remaining with the female for the rest of her life. This arrangement ensures that when the female is ready to reproduce, a mate is already present. It removes the uncertainty of future encounters, transforming a rare meeting into a lasting association. The male no longer needs to search again, and the female carries with her the means to reproduce whenever conditions allow. It is a solution that appears unusual when compared to more familiar forms of reproduction, yet it reflects the specific challenges of life in this environment. These strategies, varied as they are, share a common purpose. They reduce the reliance on chance, increasing the likelihood that reproduction can occur despite the distances involved. Each approach represents a response to the same underlying condition, the separation imposed by a vast and sparsely populated world. Within this framework, reproduction becomes an expression of adaptation not only to physical conditions, but to spatial ones as well. The deep ocean does not prevent life from continuing, but it reshapes the ways in which continuity is achieved. Through chemical signals, brief flashes of light, and more permanent forms of association, life finds paths to persist, even where encounters are few and far between. In a place where vision recedes, another sense extends outward, filling the space that light once defined. The ocean carries sound with a quiet efficiency, allowing vibrations to move through water across distances that would be difficult to bridge in air. Here, awareness does not depend on what can be seen, but on what can be felt and heard, as subtle shifts in pressure travel through the surrounding medium. Water transmits sound with remarkable continuity. Waves of vibration move through it with less loss of energy, allowing signals to persist and travel farther. A movement in one location can be sensed at another, not as an image, but as a pattern of disturbance that reveals presence and direction. This quality makes sound a primary means of perceiving the environment, especially in regions where visibility offers little information. Many organisms in the deep are attuned to these vibrations. Their bodies respond to changes in pressure, detecting movements that might indicate the approach of another animal or the shifting of water around them. This sensitivity allows them to interpret their surroundings without relying on light, building an understanding of space through the transmission of energy rather than through visual form. The seafloor itself contributes to this acoustic landscape. Currents moving across terrain, the settling of material, and the slow interactions between organisms all produce faint sounds that accumulate into a continuous background. These are not loud or sudden, but persistent, forming a subtle texture that reflects the ongoing processes within the deep. Within this environment, some animals generate their own sounds, creating signals that travel outward through the water. These signals may serve to communicate with others of the same species or to establish presence within a given area. The patterns they produce are shaped by the conditions of the environment, designed to travel effectively through the medium that surrounds them. Larger animals, particularly whales, make use of this property on a broader scale. Their calls can travel across vast distances, moving through the ocean as sustained, low-frequency vibrations. These sounds allow individuals to maintain contact over ranges that extend far beyond what sight could provide. The ocean becomes a channel for communication, carrying these signals across layers and through regions that would otherwise remain isolated. These vocalizations are not confined to the upper layers, but extend into the deeper parts of the ocean, contributing to the overall soundscape. The presence of these distant calls adds another dimension to the environment, linking different regions through shared acoustic space. Even in areas where whales do not remain for long, their signals pass through, leaving traces of connection within the water. The deep ocean, often imagined as silent, reveals itself to be filled with these forms of communication and interaction. The absence of light does not result in an absence of information. Instead, it shifts the way information is conveyed, placing greater emphasis on sound and vibration as primary carriers of meaning. Through this acoustic network, the ocean maintains a sense of continuity across its depths. Movements, signals, and interactions are transmitted through the water, creating a field of awareness that extends beyond immediate contact. The environment becomes perceptible, not through sight, but through the constant exchange of energy in the form of sound. In this way, the deep is not defined by silence, but by a different mode of presence, one that unfolds through the subtle transmission of vibrations across a vast and interconnected space. Time unfolds differently in these depths, not marked by light or shadow, but by processes that extend quietly across long intervals. Change does not announce itself in quick transitions or visible cycles. Instead, it accumulates slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if each moment lingers longer than it would elsewhere. The pace of life, adjusts to this environment, stretching outward in ways that alter both growth and duration. Many organisms here follow biological schedules that move at a reduced tempo. Growth can take years, sometimes decades, progressing in small increments that reflect the limited availability of energy. Where conditions at the surface allow for rapid development, the deep ocean encourages restraint. Each stage of life unfolds with care, shaped by an environment that offers little incentive for speed. Cold temperatures contribute to this measured rhythm. Chemical reactions within living cells proceed more slowly when heat is limited, influencing metabolism and the rate at which energy is used. This slowing does not halt activity, but it extends it, allowing organisms to function over longer spans without requiring frequent input. The body becomes tuned to conserve, maintaining processes at a pace that aligns with the surrounding conditions. Scarcity reinforces this effect. With food arriving unpredictably and often in small amounts, organisms cannot rely on steady intake to support rapid growth or constant activity. Instead, they adjust their internal systems to make the most of what is available, stretching each resource over time. Growth becomes a gradual accumulation rather than a quick expansion, and development proceeds only as conditions allow. In some species, maturity is reached later than in more dynamic environments. The transition from early stages to reproductive readiness may take extended periods, reflecting the slow accumulation of the energy required to support it. Once achieved, this maturity can persist for long durations, allowing individuals to reproduce across many years rather than within a narrow window. Lifespans, too, can extend beyond what might be expected. In the absence of frequent disturbances, and with a metabolism that proceeds at a reduced rate, some organisms continue to exist for considerable lengths of time. Their presence in the environment is steady, not marked by rapid turnover, but by persistence. They become part of a continuity that stretches across years, even decades, within the same location. This extended pacing influences not only individual organisms, but the broader system in which they exist. Interactions between species, the movement of energy, and the transformation of material all occur within this slower framework. Processes that might be rapid elsewhere unfold gradually here, contributing to a sense of stability that is sustained over long periods. The environment itself reflects this rhythm. Without the regular changes driven by light or temperature fluctuations, the deep ocean maintains conditions that remain consistent across time. This stability allows life to align with a steady pace, reducing the need for rapid adaptation and favoring forms that can persist within a narrow range of variation. Within this setting, the perception of time shifts. It is no longer tied to cycles that can be easily observed, but to the slow progression of biological and environmental processes. The deep ocean becomes a place where duration is extended, where change is subtle, and where life continues in a manner that feels both deliberate and unhurried. In this way, the depths reveal a different relationship between life and time, one that emphasizes continuity over immediacy and persistence over rapid transformation. Long before any instrument reached these depths, the ocean below a certain point was imagined as an absence, a region so remote and inhospitable that life was thought unlikely to persist there. The surface was visible and active, its patterns easy to observe, but beyond a certain depth, knowledge gave way to assumption. The idea of a largely lifeless abyss took hold, shaped not by direct observation, but by the limits of what could be seen and measured. Early attempts to understand the deeper ocean were cautious and indirect. Weighted lines were lowered from ships to measure depth, a process known as sounding. These lines descended until they met resistance, offering only a single piece of information: how far the water extended below. They did not reveal what existed at the bottom, only that the distance was far greater than expected. As methods improved, dredging began to provide glimpses of what lay beneath. Nets and metal frames were dragged across the seafloor and then brought back to the surface, carrying with them fragments of the environment below. These collections were often incomplete and sometimes damaged, yet they offered the first physical evidence that life could exist at depths once considered barren. Small organisms, shells, and traces of living structures appeared among the recovered material, challenging the prevailing view. Each expedition added to this emerging picture, though progress remained slow and uncertain. The deep ocean resisted easy exploration. Equipment could fail under pressure, and the process of retrieving samples introduced its own distortions. Yet, even with these limitations, the pattern began to shift. The repeated presence of living material suggested that the abyss was not empty, but inhabited in ways that were not yet fully understood. Over time, these findings accumulated, gradually weakening the idea of a lifeless deep. Scientists began to reconsider earlier assumptions, recognizing that the absence of evidence had been a reflection of limited access rather than actual conditions. The ocean below the reach of light was not devoid of life, but part of a larger system that extended far beyond what had been directly observed. The transition from speculation to understanding did not occur in a single moment. It unfolded through a series of observations, each one contributing to a broader realization. The deep ocean revealed itself not as an extension of the surface world, but as a distinct environment with its own forms of life and patterns of existence. This recognition marked a shift in how the ocean was perceived, opening a new field of study that would continue to expand. The timeline of this discovery is relatively recent when compared to the long history of human interaction with the ocean. For much of that history, the depths remained inaccessible, their conditions inferred rather than experienced. Only in the past few centuries have the tools and methods developed to allow more direct investigation, and even then, the process has been gradual. As exploration continued, the understanding of the deep ocean evolved from a simple absence to a complex presence. Each new observation added detail to a picture that had once been undefined. The recognition that life could persist under such conditions broadened the concept of where and how life might exist, extending it into regions that had previously been dismissed. This shift in perspective reflects the interplay between observation and assumption, where new evidence reshapes long-held beliefs. The deep ocean, once imagined as empty, emerged as a hidden domain, its existence confirmed not by a single discovery, but by the accumulation of many small, persistent efforts to reach beyond the limits of the known. Access to these depths arrives not through direct presence, but through carefully built extensions of human reach, machines that descend where bodies cannot remain. They carry cameras, lights, sensors, and tools, translating an environment that resists contact into forms that can be observed from afar. Each descent is a mediated experience, shaped by engineering as much as by the conditions being explored. Submersibles provide one path, enclosing small crews within reinforced hulls designed to endure the immense forces of the deep. Inside, observation occurs through limited windows or through instruments that relay images from outside. The descent is controlled and deliberate, the vehicle moving slowly through the water, guided by systems that must function reliably under conditions that leave little room for error. Even with these protections, the environment imposes limits, constraining how long such visits can last and how far they can extend. More commonly, Remotely operated vehicles travel downward without human occupants, connected to ships above by long cables that transmit power and information. These vehicles carry cameras that illuminate the darkness with artificial light, revealing shapes and movements that would otherwise remain unseen. Mechanical arms allow them to collect samples, interact with objects, and place instruments on the seafloor. Their presence is precise, yet always at a distance, controlled from far above. Autonomous landers offer another approach, descending independently and settling onto the seafloor for extended periods. Equipped with sensors and recording devices, they gather data over time, capturing the slow processes that define these environments. After completing their tasks, they release weights and rise back to the surface, carrying with them the information they have collected. Their operation reflects a different kind of observation, one that relies on patience rather than direct control. Each of these machines must contend with the same challenges imposed by the deep. Pressure acts continuously on every surface, requiring materials and designs that can withstand forces far beyond those encountered at the surface. Darkness limits visibility, making artificial illumination necessary, yet that light alters the environment it reveals. Communication is constrained by the properties of water, where signals cannot travel freely, often requiring physical connections or slow transmission methods. Navigation is complex, as familiar reference points are absent, and positioning must be inferred through instruments rather than direct observation. The equipment itself is vulnerable. Mechanical components can fail under stress, electronics must be protected from the surrounding conditions, and even small issues can compromise an entire mission. Each descent carries a degree of uncertainty, where success depends on the precise functioning of systems that operate at the edge of their limits. Through these machines, glimpses of the deep are obtained, yet they remain partial. The field of view is restricted, the duration limited, and the presence temporary. The environment is not fully entered, but approached, observed through tools that extend human perception without replacing it. What is seen is shaped by the capabilities of the equipment, framed by the conditions under which it operates. In this way, exploration of the deep ocean remains an act of borrowing access. The machines descend, gather information, and return, leaving the environment largely unchanged by their presence. The world they observe continues beyond their reach, vast and persistent, not fully captured by any single descent. Despite the advances in technology, the deep retains its resistance to complete understanding. It reveals itself in fragments through images and samples that hint at a larger whole. Each mission adds to a growing body of knowledge, yet the environment remains expansive, its full complexity extending beyond what can be easily observed. The relationship between observer and environment is shaped by this distance. The deep ocean is not entered in the same way as other places, but encountered through the careful use of machines, each one bridging a gap that cannot be crossed directly, and each one returning with only a portion of what lies below. Beyond the edges of what has been recorded, there remains a vast portion of this world that exists without names, without clear placement in any catalog, and without direct human familiarity. The outlines of the deep have been traced in places, yet the living details within those outlines continue to emerge slowly, as if revealed in fragments rather than in a complete picture. Each descent, each retrieved sample, and each captured image has the potential to introduce something that has not been described before. Organisms appear that do not fit neatly into known categories, carrying structures or behaviors that require careful study before they can be understood. These encounters are not rare exceptions, but part of an ongoing pattern where the deep ocean continues to expand the boundaries of what is recognized as life. The difficulty of reaching these habitats plays a central role in this incomplete knowledge. Vast distances separate one region from another, and the conditions that define them limit how often they can be visited. A single expedition may focus on a narrow area, leaving surrounding regions unexplored. What is observed in one location offers only a partial view, hinting at a broader diversity that extends beyond immediate reach. Scale adds another layer to this uncertainty. The deep ocean covers an immense portion of the planet, far exceeding the areas that have been studied in detail. Even within regions that have been visited, the coverage is often limited, leaving gaps between observations. These gaps are not empty, but simply unexamined, holding forms of life that have yet to be encountered. The process of discovery reflects this structure. New species are identified not through a steady, predictable flow, but through moments of recognition when an organism is examined closely enough to reveal its distinct characteristics. These moments occur in laboratories, aboard research vessels, and within the analysis of data collected over time. The act of naming becomes a way of bringing something into shared understanding, transforming an unknown presence into a recognized part of the natural world. Yet, for every species that is described, there are many more that remain beyond current awareness. Some exist in regions that have not been reached, others in forms that are difficult to capture or preserve. The limitations of observation shape the boundaries of knowledge, leaving much of the deep ocean in a state that is known to exist, yet not fully known in detail. This condition creates a landscape of open-ended discovery. The deep ocean does not present itself as a completed inventory, but as an environment where the process of finding continues. Each new observation adds to a growing framework, but that framework remains incomplete, always extending outward as new information is gathered. The sense of the unknown is not confined to distant or extreme locations alone. Even within areas that have been visited multiple times, variations and new forms continue to appear. The diversity of life in the deep is not static, and the ability to perceive it improves as methods and tools evolve. What was once overlooked can become visible, and what was once misunderstood can be reinterpreted. In this way, the deep ocean remains one of the few places on Earth where discovery retains a certain openness. It is not defined by what has already been fully mapped or cataloged, but by what continues to emerge. The environment invites exploration, not through spectacle alone, but through the steady unfolding of knowledge, where each encounter carries the possibility of something not yet seen. The presence of these unknown forms does not diminish the understanding that has been built, but extends it, suggesting that the deep ocean holds a complexity that cannot be fully captured at once. It exists as a living system that continues to reveal itself gradually, shaped by distance, depth, and the limits of observation. The meaning of this hidden world does not remain contained within the ocean itself, but extends outward, reshaping how life is understood beyond the boundaries of this planet. What was once considered necessary for life, steady light, familiar chemistry, and moderate conditions, has been quietly reconsidered through encounters with environments that operate under entirely different rules. The deep sea has not only revealed unfamiliar organisms, it has altered the framework used to imagine where life can exist at all. Communities that thrive without sunlight have been central to this shift. In places where energy rises from within the earth rather than from above, organisms form systems that depend on chemical reactions instead of photosynthesis. Microbes draw energy from compounds dissolved in the surrounding water, building the base of entire ecosystems that exist in complete darkness. Larger organisms, in turn, depend on these microbes, forming relationships that allow life to persist without any connection to the surface world. This realization broadened the definition of habitability. Life no longer appeared limited to environments warmed and illuminated by a nearby star. Instead, it became possible to imagine living systems sustained by internal energy sources operating beneath layers of ice or within enclosed bodies of water. The deep ocean provided a working example, not as a theoretical model, but as a present reality that could be studied directly. Attention began to turn toward other worlds where similar conditions might exist. Certain distant moons are believed to contain vast oceans beneath their frozen surfaces, kept liquid by internal heat rather than by sunlight. These hidden seas, sealed away from direct observation, share key features with the deep ocean: darkness, pressure, and isolation from surface conditions. The comparison does not depend on resemblance alone, but on the underlying processes that allow liquid water and chemical energy to coexist. The possibility that such environments could support life rests on the patterns observed in the depths of Earth's oceans, where energy can be extracted from chemical gradients and where stable conditions persist over long periods. Life may find ways to emerge and endure. The organisms found in these deep habitats demonstrate that biological systems can adapt to constraints that once seemed prohibitive, using strategies that differ from those seen at the surface. This shift in perspective affects not only the search for life elsewhere, but the understanding of life itself. The requirements become less rigid, less tied to specific conditions, and more centered on the availability of energy and the stability of an environment over time. Life appears less as a narrow phenomenon and more as a flexible process, capable of unfolding in varied settings. The deep ocean serves as a reference point in this broader view. It provides tangible examples of systems that operate independently of sunlight, showing that complexity can arise in ways that were not initially expected. These examples do not offer direct answers about life beyond Earth, but they establish that the range of possible environments is wider than once assumed. As this understanding develops, the boundary between familiar and unfamiliar begins to shift. The deep sea, once seen as an isolated curiosity, becomes part of a larger context, linking the study of Earth to the exploration of other worlds. The conditions that shape life in these depths echo in places far beyond this planet, suggesting that similar processes might be at work elsewhere. In this way, the ocean below becomes a guide, not through direct comparison, but through the principles it reveals. It shows that life does not require a single path, but can emerge wherever conditions allow for sustained interaction between energy, matter, and time, expanding the horizon of what is considered possible. Far from the surface, where distance once suggested safety, traces of human activity have begun to settle into places that seemed beyond reach. They arrive gradually, carried by currents, sinking through layers, or introduced directly through methods that extend human industry into deeper waters. The separation between the familiar world above and the hidden one below has narrowed, not through presence alone, but through influence. Fishing practices that operate along the seafloor have altered wide areas of these environments. Large nets move across the bottom, disturbing sediment and removing organisms in their path. Structures that formed slowly over long periods can be disrupted in moments, leaving behind a changed landscape. The impact is not always immediately visible, yet it reshapes the conditions that support life, altering patterns that had remained stable for extended spans of time. Other forms of material arrive more quietly. Fragments of plastic descend from the upper ocean, breaking apart as they sink, eventually settling among organisms that have no history of encountering such substances. These materials do not integrate into the existing systems, yet they persist, becoming part of the environment in ways that are not easily reversed. Their presence reflects a connection between surface activity and deep habitats, linking distant actions to places that seem removed from them. Chemical compounds follow similar paths. Substances released into the ocean can travel downward, carried by water movement, dispersing through layers until they reach the depths. There, they interact with environments that are often sensitive to change, where even small alterations can influence biological processes. The pathways are complex, and the effects unfold slowly, making them difficult to observe in full. The possibility of extracting resources directly from the deep seafloor introduces another dimension. Interest in mineral deposits found in certain regions has led to discussions about mining activities in these environments. The process would involve removing material from areas that have developed over long periods, raising questions about how such disturbances might affect the surrounding systems. The scale of these operations and their potential consequences are still being examined, yet the consideration itself marks a shift in how these regions are viewed. Recovery in the deep ocean does not follow the pace seen in more dynamic environments. With growth occurring slowly and energy limited, changes can persist for extended periods before returning to previous conditions, if they return at all. Organisms that take years or decades to develop cannot replace losses quickly, and the structures they form may require similar spans to re-establish. This extended timeline shapes the way disturbances are absorbed, making them more enduring. Remoteness, once a form of protection, no longer guarantees isolation. The reach of human activity has expanded, and the pathways through which influence travels have become more evident. The deep ocean remains distant in terms of direct experience, yet it is connected to the surface in ways that allow changes to move between them. Understanding of these environments continues to grow, but it remains incomplete. The full extent of their complexity is still being revealed, even as they are affected by processes that originate far above. This overlap between discovery and impact creates a quiet tension where knowledge develops alongside the realization that influence is already present. Within this context, the deep ocean retains its character as a place shaped by conditions that differ from those at the surface, yet it also reflects the broader system of which it is a part. The changes introduced are not always immediate or dramatic, but they accumulate, altering environments that have persisted with little disturbance. The recognition of this influence does not alter the nature of the deep itself, but it changes the way it is understood, not as a separate realm, but as one connected to the actions that occur elsewhere, carrying those effects into a world that continues to unfold beneath them. There is a certain stillness that remains after everything seen so far, not an absence, but a lingering sense that the world below does not fully resolve into something familiar. It stays with the mind in a quiet way, as if it resists being placed neatly alongside other parts of the planet. The deep ocean does not announce itself loudly, yet it leaves an impression that continues long after it is no longer directly observed. Part of this response comes from contrast. The surface world is defined by movement, light, and patterns that repeat in ways that are easy to recognize. Days begin and end, colors shift with the sun, and life gathers in forms that feel structured and visible. Beneath that, the deeper ocean unfolds differently, removing those reference points one by one until only a more fundamental version of existence remains. What is left does not follow the same rhythms, and this difference creates a subtle sense of distance. That distance is not measured in kilometers alone. It is a separation in how the environment operates, how life is sustained, and how perception is shaped. The absence of familiar cues does not create emptiness, but it introduces a form of presence that feels harder to interpret. Organisms move, interact, and persist, yet they do so in ways that do not align with the expectations built from life at the surface. There is also a quiet sense of scale that contributes to this feeling. The deep ocean extends across vast areas, far beyond what is commonly imagined, and much of it remains only partially understood. This combination of size and limited knowledge creates an awareness of how much lies beyond direct experience. It suggests that even within a well-known planet, there are regions that remain distant in understanding, not because they are unreachable, but because they are complex in ways that take time to unfold. The forms of life encountered there add another layer. They do not resemble what is typically associated with familiar environments, yet they are not arbitrary. Each shape, each behavior, reflects a long process of adaptation to conditions that differ from those at the surface. The result is a collection of organisms that appear unusual, not because they are disconnected from the natural world, but because they represent a different set of solutions to the same underlying challenge of survival. This combination of difference and continuity creates a tension that is difficult to resolve. The deep ocean feels distant, yet it is part of the same system that supports life everywhere else. It exists beneath everyday experience, influencing and being influenced by processes that connect all parts of the planet. The realization that such a place has always been present, just out of view, adds to its impact. There is also a sense of humility that emerges from this awareness. The understanding of the world is shaped by what can be observed, yet the deep ocean demonstrates that observation is always partial. It reminds that knowledge develops over time, and that even familiar surroundings can contain aspects that remain outside immediate comprehension. At the same time, there is a quiet fascination that continues to draw attention back to these depths. The idea that life can persist under such conditions, that entire systems can function without the elements usually considered essential, expands the sense of what is possible. It does not replace the familiar, but it broadens it, adding layers that were not previously considered. In this way, the deep ocean becomes more than a location. It becomes a perspective, a way of seeing the planet as something that holds more than what is immediately visible. It feels unfamiliar, not because it belongs to another world, but because it reveals how much of this world still lies beyond simple description, existing just beneath the surface of everyday understanding. The journey settles into a quiet understanding, as if the surface of the ocean, with its light and motion, now feels like only one layer of a much larger story. Beneath it, a hidden world continues, shaped by forces that rarely touch everyday experience. Darkness replaces daylight. Pressure reshapes structure. Food arrives slowly and unpredictably, and life adjusts itself with a patience that stretches across long spans of time. Chemistry becomes a source of energy where light cannot reach, and entire communities rise from processes that unfold far below the influence of the sun. What has been revealed is not a distant fantasy, but a real and continuous part of the same planet. The ocean does not end at the edge of what can be easily seen. It deepens into regions that feel removed, not because they are separate, but because they operate under conditions that differ so completely from the surface. The deeper one considers it, the more it begins to resemble a world hidden in plain existence, present all along, yet rarely encountered in full. there is a quiet contrast in that realization. The idea of distant planets and faraway environments often carries a sense of separation. Yet here, within Earth itself, lies a realm that can feel just as unfamiliar. It does not require travel across space to encounter it, only a shift in depth. And even then, access remains partial, shaped by the limits of exploration and the tools used to reach downward. The deep ocean exists close in distance, yet far in understanding. Everything encountered along the way belongs to this world in a direct and grounded sense. The organisms described are not imagined forms, but living systems that persist under conditions once thought unlikely. The environments are not speculative landscapes, but real structures shaped by geology, chemistry, and time. The processes that sustain them follow principles that can be observed and studied, even if they are not always fully understood. This grounding in reality adds a certain weight to the experience. The unfamiliar is not created through invention, but through discovery. It reflects the depth of the natural world rather than an escape from it. The deep ocean becomes a reminder that even within known boundaries, there are layers that continue to unfold, offering perspectives that extend beyond initial expectations. As the descent ends and attention returns upward, the impression of that hidden world remains. It lingers not as a single image, but as a collection of moments, each one revealing a different aspect of how life can exist. The memory of those depths does not close with a final point, but settles into a broader awareness of the planet as a place that holds more than what is immediately visible. If one part of that journey stays present, whether it is the slow rhythm of life, the structures of the seafloor, or the ways organisms adapt to conditions that seem unlikely, it becomes a small connection to a larger whole. Each detail carries its own significance, contributing to a picture that continues to expand. You are welcome to share which part of the deep ocean stayed with you the most, as each perspective adds another layer to the understanding of this hidden world. If you found yourself drawn into this quiet exploration, consider supporting the channel with a like and subscribing to return for more deep-sea sleep stories, where the unseen parts of our planet continue to unfold gently, one layer at a time.